Before the pyramids, before Sumer, before the so-called birth of civilization in Mesopotamia, there were the Natufians, and they were black. These African origin people were not wandering primitives, as many textbooks still insinuate, but bold builders of megaliths, designers of cities, shapers of stone and destiny. They moved like pharaohs before the Nile had even whispered its name. They carried within their blood the blueprint of mastery, not just over land, but over the very concept of civilization itself. And the deeper we dig, the more we realize the glory of the Natufians is the buried majesty of Africa. Modern science now confirms what the stones have always whispered. The Natufians carried Africa in their blood. Ancient DNA from Natufian remains reveals paternal lineages E1, B1, B1, B2, and E1, B1, Y chromosome haplogroups that trace directly to East and Northeast Africa. Their mothers, too, bore mitochondrial haplogroups U6 and M1, both rooted in deep North African prehistory. Autosomal DNA shows approximately 21.2% Northern African ancestry and 6.8% Omotic-related ancestry from southern Ethiopia, the rest linking them to Arabian and West Asian populations. Archaeogenetic research even shows close ties to the Ibero-Maurusian people of North Africa's Taforalt caves, proof that the Mediterranean was no barrier, but a bridge carrying African genius into the Levant thousands of years before Egypt's first pyramid rose. But they were far more than just an origin point on a genetic map. The Natufians ushered in a revolution that would change the course of humanity. These were the first known people to settle in permanent villages, long before agriculture became widespread. While others wandered, the Natufians built. They constructed stone houses with stone foundations, some sunken partially into the ground, an architectural sophistication that speaks of foresight, planning, and communal strength. In Jericho, one of their oldest and most famous settlements, archaeologists uncovered massive stone walls and a stone tower dating back nearly 11,000 years. Let that sink in. While much of the world was still hunting and gathering in small bands, the Natufians had already organized urban centers with defense systems, storage areas, and communal infrastructure. That is not survival. That is strategy. That is civilization. They were also spiritual visionaries. At sites like Hilazon Tahtit in Israel, archaeologists discovered elaborate burial chambers. One grave, believed to belong to a female shaman, was filled with rare objects: tortoise shells, the pelvis of a leopard, a human foot, and eagle wings. This was not haphazard ritual. It was coded meaning. It was Afrospirituality in full bloom. The concept of sacred burial, of symbolic offerings to guide the soul into the afterlife, has its deepest roots in African cosmology. The Natufians brought this northward, embedding the soil of the so-called Middle East with the spirit of Kemet long before pyramids rose along the Nile. But let us go further. Beyond their cities and their rituals, the Natufians left a legacy etched in stone, literally. At sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, we find towering megalithic structures, T-shaped stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carved with animals and cosmic symbols. Though Göbekli Tepe postdates the classic Natufian era by a few centuries, its builders show clear cultural and genetic continuity with the Natufians. The fingerprints match. This is not coincidence. This is inheritance. These massive stone temples, often called the world's first cathedrals, were not created by wandering foragers. They were engineered by descendants of a people who had long understood the laws of balance, harmony, geometry, and the energetic power of sacred space. These are black fingerprints on whitewashed stones. It is no accident that these people began their journey in the African heartland. The Natufians represent the African diaspora before there was a diaspora, a movement not of fleeing, but of flowering. From Africa's Nile Valley, Rift Valley, and Sahara, they emerged and radiated northward into the Levant, then westward into southern Europe. Along the way, they carried their language, their bone-deep knowledge of the stars, their sacred rites, and most importantly, their will to build. And build they did. In Cyprus, their settlements included stone houses and burial grounds dating back over 10,000 years, older than anything in Greece or Rome. In southern Anatolia, megalithic complexes continued the Natufian legacy of stonework, worship, and ancestral reverence. This wasn't scattered innovation. It was a tidal wave of culture, a civilizational presence that demands recognition. Western textbooks still struggle to account for this black brilliance. They prefer to speak of the Neolithic Revolution as a sudden burst of farming and city building that mysteriously emerged in the Fertile Crescent. But they skip the fact that the very people who sparked that revolution were black Africans. The Natufians brought not just crops, but culture, not just settlements, but spirit. And in doing so, they laid the foundations for everything that followed, from Mesopotamia to Mycenae. Their agricultural practices, while still debated, likely included the early cultivation of wild cereals such as barley and emmer wheat, skills learned in African savannahs and carried northward. Their knowledge of food storage, architecture, and stone tool creation was unmatched in their time. But their true genius lay not just in what they did, but how they thought. These were a people whose worldview fused the material and the metaphysical. Their burial practices show a belief in life after death. Their temple layouts suggest cosmological alignment, with pillars often facing cardinal directions or solstice points. They understood the dance between heaven and earth. They did not just survive the elements, they negotiated with the universe. And yet, their black legacy has been systematically erased. How many students learn that the builders of Jericho, the world's oldest walled city, were Africans? How many learn that the first urban planners, astronomers, and architects of the so-called Middle East were black? Instead, the story of civilization is told as if it began in Mesopotamia, skipping the thousands of years of African achievement that made Mesopotamia possible. Let us be clear, the Natufians were not just a bridge between Africa and the Levant. They were the bridge builders, the culture bearers. They took the embers of African genius and sparked flame across a new geography. They did not adapt to the Levant, they transformed it. And they did not disappear. Their DNA lives on in the ancient peoples of the Levant, in the pre-dynastic Egyptians, in the early Anatolians and Cycladic islanders, and yes, even in modern African diasporas. Genetic studies have confirmed that the Natufians carried African ancestry, especially in their Y chromosome lineage, E1b1b, which connects them directly to East African populations. Yet the textbooks remain silent. The documentaries remain pale. The archaeologists hedge their words. Why? Because to accept that the Natufians were black Africans is to rewrite the entire story of civilization. It is to admit that the foundational elements of architecture, astronomy, ritual, and communal living came not from Europe or the Near East, but from Africa, again and again. But the stones do not lie. The bones do not lie. The burial sites, the art, the buildings, they all speak of majesty. They all whisper, "We were first, we were great, we were black." And the Natufians, who walked the earth with calm power thousands of years before the Bible was written, left a trail of brilliance that no amount of historical erasure can destroy. In a time before borders, before racism, before the politics of pigmentation, they moved with purpose and pride. They were not confused migrants. They were cultural commanders. They brought order where there was chaos. They brought homes where there were caves. They brought stars into the soil. This was not happenstance. This was a divine legacy, one rooted in the same consciousness that birthed Ifa, that shaped Nubia, that whispered secrets to the Dogon under the African night sky. The Natufians were part of this grand tradition, and they carved it into the very bones of the earth. We must reclaim them, not as Near Eastern foragers or proto-agriculturalists, but as the architects of early greatness. As proof that African brilliance did not begin with Egypt, it began long before, in the forgotten stones and honored dead of a land now called the Middle East, but once pulsing with black genius. Let no one tell you civilization began elsewhere. It began in the dark skin of visionaries, in the hammering of stones by black hands, in the sacred alignments of temples older than history. It began with the Natufians, and through them, it continues. Their bones now lie beneath the soil of Israel, Syria, Jordan, and Turkey, but their story belongs to Africa. Their cities have crumbled, but their memory is eternal. Their glory was buried, but we are the resurrection. Their majesty was hidden, but we are the revelation. And so we say, rise again, Natufians. Rise from the forgotten footnotes of colonial archaeology. Rise from the dusty archives of academia. Rise in the hearts of your descendants, the children of Africa who remember. Rise in the retelling of history, no longer pale and silent, but loud with pride and golden with sunlight. We know who you are. We carry your blueprint, and we will not let them forget. Thanks for watching this episode. Do remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And look out for the next one on Africa's great civilizations.